The dress arrived at dawn, not the one she had been promised. Margaret Ashford stood in the center of the room that had been assigned to her. Not the Duchess's chambers, she had noted, but a guest room on the east wing, modest, cold, with a window that faced the stables, and she looked at what had been laid across the bed while she slept. Black, white, stiff cotton, brass buttons down the front. A servant's uniform. There was a note pinned to the collar. She did not rush to read it. She stood very still for a moment, the way she had learned to stand still in her father's house when something was about to hurt, shoulders back, chin level, breathing slow and even. Then she unpinned the note and read it. This house runs on order. Every member of this household holds a position. You will find yours clearly defined within. Welcome to Cavendish Manor, E.C. She read it twice. Then she folded it in half and placed it in the drawer of the nightstand beneath her Bible. She did not cry. She had cried 3 months ago, the night her father sat her down in his study and told her she was to marry the Duke of Cavendish, a man she had never met, in exchange for the clearing of debts she had never been told existed. She had used all her tears then. There were none left for a uniform. Margaret picked it up, held it at arm's length. It was well made, she noticed, better than anything she had owned 2 years ago. The Cavendish household did not scrimp, even on cruelty. She dressed. The ceremony was set for 11 o'clock in the private chapel on the east grounds. At 10:30, Margaret descended the main staircase of Cavendish Manor in a black and white servant's uniform, her hair pinned neatly at the base of her neck, her hands folded in front of her, her face entirely composed. The entrance hall was full. 40 guests, perhaps more, members of the county's finest families, neighbors of the Duke, people who had received their ivory invitations 3 weeks ago and arrived yesterday by carriage, eager to see whom Edmund Cavendish had finally agreed to marry after 4 years of refusing every eligible match presented to him. They had expected silk. They had expected jewels. They had expected the performance of wealth meeting wealth. They had not expected this. The silence that fell was not immediate. It moved through the room in a wave, starting at the foot of the staircase and spreading outward, swallowing conversation after conversation, until the only sound was the fire in the grate and the distant creak of the manor settling against the morning wind. Margaret did not slow her step. She had decided on the stairs that she would not slow her step. She saw her father near the far wall. He was standing with 2 men she did not recognize, business associates, she assumed, men who had come not for the wedding but for what the wedding represented. When he saw her, his face did something complicated and fast. His eyes dropped to the uniform. Something moved across his expression, not shame, she thought, closer to inconvenience. He looked away. She kept walking. She did not look for the Duke. She knew where he would be at the front of the chapel waiting, because whatever Edmund Cavendish was, he was not a man who arrived late to anything. She had learned that much in the 3 brief and excruciating meetings they had conducted in her father's drawing room before the contracts were signed. He was punctual. He was controlled. He chose his words with the precision of a man who understood that words, once spoken, could not be reclaimed. He had sent that note. He had chosen every word of it. Every member of this household holds a position. She understood perfectly. A woman near the doorway whispered something to her companion. Margaret heard only the shape of it, not the words, but the tone, the particular texture of pity sharpened by entertainment. She had grown up on the edges of rooms like this one. She knew what that sound meant. She reached the bottom of the staircase. And then the front doors of Cavendish Manor opened. Not the chapel doors. The main doors, the tall, iron-handled doors that faced the drive, through which guests arrived and carriages departed. They opened with the particular authority of doors that are never opened without reason, and the morning light came through sharp and cold, and with it came the sound of a cane striking marble. One step, then another. The guests nearest the entrance moved without quite knowing why. A parting, instinctive, the way water moves around something that does not intend to be stopped. The woman who entered was not tall. She had not been tall even in her youth, Margaret would later learn, and 83 years had compressed her further, curving her spine into something that suggested a question mark, though her head remained lifted with an authority that made her height entirely irrelevant. Her dress was gray. Her hair was white. Her eyes, sharp and dark and moving swiftly across the room, found Margaret at the foot of the staircase within 3 seconds of crossing the threshold. They stayed there. Vivienne Cavendish, Dowager Duchess, mother of the late Duke, grandmother of the current one, had not been seen in public in 2 years. She had written to no one, accepted no visitors, and ignored every letter her grandson had sent regarding the upcoming wedding. She looked at Margaret. She looked at the uniform. Her expression did not change, but something in the room changed, some pressure, some temperature, and every person standing between the Dowager Duchess and the foot of that staircase found a reason to be somewhere else. In the silence that followed, Vivienne Cavendish crossed the entrance hall, stopped 3 feet from Margaret, and looked at her for a long moment with those sharp, unhurried eyes. Then she turned her head toward the chapel doors. Her voice when she spoke was not loud. It did not need to be. "Edmund." 1 word. The chapel doors opened. Edmund Cavendish filled a doorway the way very few men did, not through width or excessive height, but through something less measurable, a stillness, a density. He stood at the threshold of the chapel and looked at the entrance hall with the expression of a man who had arranged everything precisely and was now calculating what had gone wrong. His eyes moved to his grandmother first, then to Margaret. They stayed on Margaret for exactly 3 seconds. She counted. She had developed in the weeks since her engagement a habit of counting the seconds Edmund Cavendish spent looking at her, because it was the only reliable way to measure what he was thinking. He was not a man who revealed himself in words, but duration, she had found, told its own story. 3 seconds on the uniform. 1 second back to his grandmother. He crossed the hall. He moved without urgency, which was somehow worse than if he had rushed, the unhurried pace of a man who did not believe he had anything to answer for. Guests shifted out of his path. Her father straightened. Margaret kept her hands folded and her chin level and watched him come. He stopped beside his grandmother. Vivienne did not look up at him. She was still looking at Margaret, with that expression that gave nothing away and somehow, because of that, gave everything away. "You will fix this," Vivienne said, still quiet, still perfectly even. "Now, before another minute passes in my house." "Grandmother." "I did not ask you a question, Edmund." The room was so silent that Margaret heard the fire. She heard the wind at the high windows. She heard the particular quality of a silence that occurs when 40 people are trying very hard to appear as though they are not listening. Edmund looked at Margaret then, directly, fully, not the 3-second assessment from across the room, but something longer, something that she could not quite classify, not apology, certainly not that, but perhaps the closest Edmund Cavendish could come to recalculation. She held his gaze and did not help him with it. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, without turning his head. The housekeeper appeared from the side corridor with the speed of a woman who had been hovering nearby, which Margaret suspected she had been. There was a bundle of fabric over her arm, cream-colored, simple but fine. Edmund took it, held it out toward Margaret. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. She took it. The room Edmund's housekeeper brought her to was not the East Wing guest room. It was larger, south-facing, with windows that caught the late morning light and held it. A proper dressing table. A wardrobe already hung with clothes she did not recognize and then, looking closer, did her own, but pressed and arranged with a care they had never received in her father's house. Someone had been preparing this room for some time. She dressed without assistance. She did not want assistance. She wanted the 10 minutes alone in that room to breathe and arrange her face into something she could wear for the rest of the day. The cream dress fit precisely. She did not want to think about what that meant, that someone had known her measurements, that someone had prepared this, that the uniform this morning had been a choice made against an existing alternative. She pinned her hair herself, looked in the glass for a long moment. The woman looking back at her was composed, a little pale, eyes clear. Good asterisk, she thought, stay that way. The ceremony was brief and correct. Edmund spoke his vows in the same tone he used for everything, measured, uninflected, impossible to read. Margaret spoke hers clearly, because she had decided that whatever else happened in this marriage, she would not mumble. Vivienne sat in the front pew and watched everything. Her father sat 3 rows back and watched nothing. Afterward, at the wedding breakfast, Margaret was seated at Edmund's right. The correct position. The Duchess's position. No one said anything about the mourning, which meant everyone was thinking about it. She could feel it in the careful way conversation steered around her, the slightly too bright smiles of the women who introduced themselves, the way the men addressed themselves primarily to Edmund and added her as an afterthought. She ate, she spoke when spoken to. She asked 2 women about their estates and remembered everything they told her. Edmund, beside her, said nothing to her directly for the first 2 hours. Then, during a lull between courses, without turning his head, "You wore it." She did not pretend not to understand. "Yes," she said. "I did not expect that." She picked up her glass. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Most women would have. "I am not most women," she said pleasantly, the way she had learned to say difficult things. "Your Grace." He looked at her then, that longer look again. She met it and then returned her attention to her plate. She went to find Vivienne that evening. The Dowager Duchess had been installed in the West Wing, the best rooms, Margaret noted, better than the one she herself had been given, though she chose not to examine that too closely. She knocked. A maid answered and then stepped aside, which told Margaret that Vivienne had given instructions to admit her. The old woman was seated near the window with a cup of tea and a book she was not reading. She looked up when Margaret entered and gestured to the chair opposite without ceremony. Margaret sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The fire was warmer here than anywhere else in the manor. Margaret suspected Vivienne had simply demanded it. "You wanted to see how I would manage," Margaret said finally. "Not an accusation, a statement." Vivienne looked at her over the rim of her teacup. "Did I?" "The uniform, you knew about it." A pause, then, "I knew what he intended." "And you let him." "I arrived when I arrived." Vivienne set down her cup, "and you had already dressed." Margaret was quiet for a moment, working through that. "You wanted to see what I would do." Vivienne neither confirmed nor denied this. She looked at Margaret with those dark, measuring eyes, and then she said, "He has done this before, the testing, the arrangement of circumstances." She paused. "So did his father." The fire shifted. Margaret sat with that information and let it settle. "What happened," she asked carefully, "to the women his father tested?" Vivienne looked at the window. "His mother," she said, "left when Edmund was 4 years old. We told him she died." A long pause. "She did not die." The room was very quiet. Margaret looked at the old woman, at the stillness of her, the weight of what she had just said, the way she held it without flinching. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked. Vivienne picked up her teacup again. "Because," she said, "you wore that uniform and came down those stairs anyway, and you did not look at your father when he turned away." She took a sip. "I have been waiting a long time for a woman who would do both of those things." Margaret said nothing. Outside, the last of the light was leaving the sky over Cavendish Manor. She sat with the Dowager Duchess until the candles were lit, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything unnecessary. The library at Cavendish Manor was not a room that welcomed visitors. It faced north, which meant it received no direct light at any hour, and whoever had designed it had prioritized volume over comfort, floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall, a rolling ladder on iron tracks, 3 long tables in the center that suggested scholarship rather than leisure. It smelled of leather and cold stone, and something older underneath, the particular smell of paper that has not been disturbed in a long time. Margaret discovered it on her 3rd morning as the Duchess of Cavendish, when she had exhausted the East Corridor, the morning room, the music room she was not invited to use, and the gardens, which were too cold at that hour for anything but misery. No one told her she could use the library. No one told her she couldn't. She went in. She was not looking for anything specific at first. She read. She explored. She ran her fingers along spines and pulled out volumes at random and sat at the long table nearest the door with a candle and worked her way through whatever she found. It was what she had always done in difficult houses. Her father's house had been a difficult house for most of her life, and books had been the only rooms within it that did not require her to perform anything. On the 4th morning, she found the estate records. They were not hidden. They were simply shelved in the way that things are shelved when the person doing the shelving does not expect anyone else to look, without system, without logic, tucked between agricultural almanacs and outdated maps of the county. Ledgers, correspondence files, legal documents going back 3 generations. She told herself she was simply reading. She read for 6 mornings before she found the contract. It was not labeled with her name. It was labeled with her father's name, and the name of a mining company she did not recognize, and the date, 4 months before her engagement, 8 months before the wedding. She read it twice, then a 3rd time. Then she sat very still for a long while and looked at the candle flame and thought about her father's study, the evening he had called her in and told her about the Duke. She had been mending a sleeve at the time. She remembered setting it down. She remembered the particular quality of her father's voice, not apologetic, not quite, but slightly too deliberate, the voice of a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was now delivering it carefully. "There is an opportunity," he had said, "a good match, a title security." He had not mentioned the mining rights. He had not mentioned the £30,000 in cleared debts. He had not mentioned that her name appeared in this contract in a single clause, halfway down the 2nd page, listed not as a person but as a condition: transfer of Miss Margaret Ashford, eldest daughter, informal marriage, the way one might list a parcel of land or a piece of furniture being included in a sale. A condition. Not a person, a condition. She folded the contract precisely along its original creases and replaced it exactly where she had found it, between the almanac from 1841 and the survey map of the North Field. Then she closed the ledger on top of it. Then she sat for another long moment. Then she went to breakfast. Edmund was already at the table. This was consistent. She had learned in 10 days of marriage that Edmund Cavendish kept rigid hours, that he was at his desk by 7, and at the breakfast table by 8, and that deviating from this pattern appeared to cause him something close to physical discomfort. She had begun to suspect that the rigidity was not temperament but architecture, something built deliberately, brick by brick, over a long time, to keep something else from moving. She sat. The footman poured her tea. She added milk and looked out the window at the gray November morning and said nothing. Edmund was reading correspondence. He read correspondence at breakfast every morning. He had not, in 10 days, asked her a single question about herself. She had been waiting to see how long it would take. "The library," she said. He looked up. "I have been using it in the mornings," she said. "I wanted to tell you in case someone mentioned it and you were unaware." He looked at her for a moment. "It is your house," he said. "You do not require my permission to use the library." "No," she agreed, "I don't." He returned to his correspondence. She drank her tea. "The estate records are kept there," she said. "I found them rather interesting." The pause before he looked up was very small, half a second, perhaps less, but she had been watching for it. "Are they?" he said, not a question. She set down her cup. "I had not realized how much a title of this size requires to maintain, the extent of the arrangements necessary." She looked at him pleasantly. "It must be quite a relief to have matters settled." Edmund looked at her with an expression she could not fully read, something moving behind the control, something that was either assessment or the beginning of concern. "Margaret," he said, the first time he had used her name without the formal prefix. She noted it. "What did you find in the library?" "Books," she said, "mostly." She picked up her fork. He watched her for a long moment. She ate her eggs and said nothing further, and after a while Edmund returned to his correspondence, but she noticed he did not turn a single page for the remainder of the meal. That afternoon, she wrote a letter to her father. It was a short letter, pleasantly worded. She thanked him for his efforts on her behalf, expressed hope that his health was good, mentioned that she had settled into Cavendish Manor comfortably. The final paragraph read, "I have been making use of the library here, which is extensive. I have always found that a thorough understanding of one's circumstances is the most reliable foundation for a contented life. I believe you would agree. Give my love to the house." She sealed it. She gave it to the footman for the morning post. Then she went upstairs and sat at her writing desk and opened the small notebook she had purchased in the village on her one permitted outing since the wedding. And she wrote down everything she had read in the contract, every figure, every clause, every name from memory precisely, without missing a single detail. She had always had an excellent memory. Her father had never once found this useful. She was beginning to think Edmund Cavendish would find it considerably less convenient. She visited Vivienne that evening, as she had begun to do. The old woman said nothing when Margaret sat down. She simply poured a second cup of tea and pushed it across the small table, and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that useful things arrived in their own time. "The contract," Margaret said, "between my father and the mining company, the one that lists me as a condition of sale." Vivienne did not look surprised. "You found it. You knew it existed." "I know everything that exists in this house," Vivienne said simply. "I have lived in it for 60 years. Margaret wrapped her hands around the teacup. "Does Edmund know I've found it?" "He suspects." Vivienne tilted her head slightly. "He is not a stupid man. He is a wounded one, which is a different problem entirely." "He sold me," Margaret said. She said it quietly, the way she said things that were true and painful, not dramatizing them, just setting them down where they could be seen clearly. "My father sold me and Edmund bought me, and neither of them thought it necessary to mention that to me." "No," Vivienne said, "they did not." "And you," Margaret looked at her, "what did you think was necessary?" The old woman was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving across the manor's stone face with the particular persistence of a November that intended to be felt. "I thought," Vivienne said slowly, "that what was necessary was a woman who would find out for herself." She met Margaret's eyes, and decide what to do with it. Margaret held her gaze. "That is not an answer." "No," Vivienne agreed. "It is a test. I seem to have developed a habit of those." Despite everything, despite the contract and the mourning and the 10 days of careful nothing that had passed since, despite all of it, Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Not warmth, exactly. Something more guarded than warmth. The beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. "What would you have done?" she asked. If I had not come to find you that first evening." Vivienne smiled. It was a small smile, and it rearranged the lines of her face into something that must once have been formidable in a very different way. "Gone to find you," she said. Margaret walked back through the manor that night along corridors lit by oil lamps, past closed doors and sleeping rooms, through the particular hush of a large house after dark. She stopped once, outside the door of Edmund's study. Light under the door, late past 11. She stood there for a moment, the notebook with the contract details held against her chest, and she thought about wounded men and the architecture they built, and the women who disappeared inside it. Then she walked on to her room. She was not ready, not yet. But she was beginning to understand the shape of what she was dealing with. And understanding, in Margaret Ashford's experience, was always where the real work began. She arrived on a Thursday. Margaret knew she was coming before she arrived, not because Edmund had told her, which he had not, but because she had been watching the household for 3 weeks by then and had learned to read it the way she had once learned to read her father's house. A large household, she had discovered, was not so different from a small one. The same currents moved through it, the same shifts in temperature and pace, in the careful avoidance of certain subjects by certain people. You simply had to pay attention. The housekeeper had the blue guest suite prepared on Wednesday evening. The blue suite was the best guest accommodation in the manor. Margaret had noted this on her first week, during her systematic exploration of every room she was not explicitly told she could not enter. It had a sitting room attached, a southern exposure, and a view of the formal gardens that the other guest rooms did not share. She asked Mrs. Hartley, casually, who was expected. Mrs. Hartley said, with the particular blankness of a woman who had been a housekeeper for a long time, "Lady Sylvia Holt, Your Grace, an old friend of the family." "How lovely," Margaret said. That evening she went to the library and found the Holt family in the county registry. Sylvia Holt, 26, father a baronet deceased, mother still living in Bath, no siblings, no current engagement. She had been engaged once, the registry noted in the dry shorthand of such documents, to Edmund Cavendish, Duke of Cavendish. Engagement dissolved, 1848. 3 years ago. Margaret closed the registry, replaced it on the shelf, went to bed. She slept perfectly well. Lady Sylvia Holt was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, not accidentally, not incidentally, but with an awareness of it that had been so thoroughly integrated into her manner that it no longer read as vanity. It simply read as fact, the way a tall woman's height reads as fact, something that had been accounted for and arranged around long ago. She arrived at noon with 2 trunks and a lady's maid and a smile that she distributed evenly across everyone in the entrance hall, landing finally on Edmund with a warmth that was perfectly calibrated, not inappropriate, not excessive, simply the warmth of a long friendship, of shared history, of ease. "Edmund," she said. "Sylvia," he took her hand briefly, "you look well." "I am always well." She turned then, and her eyes found Margaret, and the smile did not change, and that, Margaret thought, was the tell. Most people's smiles changed slightly when they moved from the expected to the unexpected. Sylvia's did not move at all. "And you must be Margaret," she said. "I have been so eager to meet you." "And I you," Margaret said pleasantly. "Edmund has mentioned you." He had not mentioned her. They both knew he had not mentioned her. But the claim cost Margaret nothing, and landed with a weight that Sylvia would spend the next several hours quietly measuring. "All good things, I hope," Sylvia said. "Naturally," said Margaret. She was, Margaret admitted privately, very good. Over the following 3 days, Lady Sylvia Holt demonstrated a mastery of the social interior that Margaret could only describe as architectural. She arranged herself within the household with the precision of someone who had studied the blueprints, knowing exactly when to be present and when to be absent, when to draw Edmund into conversation, and when to leave him alone in a way that would make him seek her out, when to include Margaret with a warmth so natural it could not be objected to, and when to simply, smoothly, not quite include her. She never said anything unkind. She never did anything that could be named. She was simply always slightly ahead. At dinner on the second evening, she drew Edmund into a conversation about a mutual friend, someone from before, from the years Margaret had not been part of, and the conversation filled the table with references and names and shared memories that Margaret had no access to. And Sylvia managed this with such apparent unconsciousness, such genuine pleasure in the remembering, that to object to it would have been absurd. Margaret did not object to it. She listened. She filed everything away. She asked, at one point, a single question about the mutual friend, a question that revealed she had been following the conversation precisely. And Sylvia looked at her with those careful, pleasant eyes and answered it with a warmth that was, Margaret thought, genuine in its way. Sylvia did not dislike her. That would have been simpler. Sylvia simply did not believe she would last. On the third day it rained. The kind of rain that settled in over the county and announced it intended to stay gray and steady and impersonal, turning the gardens to mist and the gravel drive to something closer to a riverbed. Margaret spent the morning in the library. She heard Sylvia and Edmund in the music room down the corridor, piano, at first, and then voices, easy and low, punctuated occasionally by something that might have been laughter. She read 3 chapters of a history of the county she did not particularly care about. At noon she went to her room to change for luncheon. Her lady's maid, a quiet girl named Dora who had been assigned to her by Mrs. Hartley, and whom Margaret had been careful to treat with consistent consideration, was already there, laying out a dress. On the dressing table, folded, was a piece of paper. Not a letter, no envelope, simply a folded page placed where Margaret would find it. Dora's back was turned. Margaret picked it up and opened it. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. Then it took her another moment to understand how she felt about what she was reading. Then she folded it again, carefully, and placed it in her pocket and said to Dora, "The blue dress, I think, not the gray." It was a letter from Sylvia to Edmund. She did not know how it had come to be on her dressing table. She did not know if Dora had placed it there deliberately, under instruction from someone, or if it had been intended for Edmund's room and delivered to the wrong door, or if Vivienne had somehow arranged it. She put nothing past Vivienne. She did not know, and she filed the not knowing alongside everything else and focused on what she did know, which was what the letter said. It was dated 2 weeks ago, before Sylvia had arrived, before even the invitation had been sent. It was not a love letter, which was almost disappointing in its way. It would have been simpler to manage a love letter. It was a strategy. Written in Sylvia's elegant hand, in the warm and reasonable tone of a concerned old friend, it outlined a series of observations about Margaret, gathered from sources Sylvia did not name, that, taken together, painted a portrait of a woman who was unstable, prone to emotional excess, unsuited to the demands of managing an estate of this size. Given, the letter suggested delicately, to episodes of a nervous character that her family had taken pains to conceal. There was no single sentence that could be called a lie. That was the craftsmanship of it. Each individual claim was either too vague to disprove or built on something real. Margaret had been withdrawn at 2 social events in the weeks before the wedding, which was true, because she had been terrified and had managed that terror by becoming very quiet. Sylvia had heard this from someone and had arranged it into evidence. The letter closed with a paragraph about Edmund's happiness, about how much Sylvia cared for him, about how she could not stand by and watch him enter an arrangement that would ultimately make both parties miserable. "I only want what is best for you," it said. "I believe you know what that is. I believe you have always known." Margaret stood at her window with the letter in her hand, and the rain moving steadily across the glass. And she breathed slowly and evenly and looked at the gardens until she had arranged her face into something she could take downstairs. Then she went to luncheon. Sylvia was already at the table. She looked up when Margaret entered and smiled, that same composed, even smile, and said, "Margaret, I was just telling Edmund about the Harwick ball last spring. You must come next year. I'll introduce you to everyone." "How kind," Margaret said. She sat. She unfolded her napkin. "I look forward to it." Edmund was watching her. She had noticed, in the past week, that he watched her more than he used to, not the 3-second assessments from across the room, but something longer, something that seemed to happen without his quite intending it. She did not know what he was looking for. She suspected he did not entirely know either. "Are you well?" he said. "You look." "Perfectly well," she said. "Thank you." She picked up her fork. Across the table, Sylvia talked about the Harwick ball. Her voice was warm and easy and filled the room beautifully, and Margaret ate her soup and listened, and said the right things at the right moments, and kept the letter folded in her pocket where she could feel the edge of it against her hip. She would not show it to Edmund, not yet. Not because she was afraid of what he would do, but because she needed to know what she would do first. That evening she sat with Vivienne for 2 hours. She did not show her the letter either. She sat with the old woman in the warm room and drank tea, and said very little and thought about wounded men and careful women, and the particular patience required to play a long game in a house that was not yet entirely hers. "You are quiet tonight," Vivienne observed. "I am thinking," Margaret said. "Good," said Vivienne, and poured more tea. Outside, the rain continued. The manor settled around them, stone and timber and 2 centuries of accumulated history, and somewhere down the corridor Sylvia Holt was presumably in the blue suite with its southern exposure and its view of the formal gardens, making her own calculations. Margaret let her. She had time. And she was beginning to understand, considerably more patient than anyone in this house had yet given her credit for. The rain lasted 4 days. On the morning of the 5th day Margaret woke to silence, not the silence of the manor, which was never entirely silent, but the particular silence of weather that has finally exhausted itself. She lay still for a moment and listened to it, this new quiet, and then she rose before Dora arrived and dressed herself and went down to the library while the rest of the house was still sleeping. She had been doing this more frequently, rising early, going to the library, sitting alone in the cold north-facing room with a candle and her notebook, and the methodical pleasure of putting things in order. She had always thought best in the early morning, before the day arranged itself around other people's requirements, before she was required to be anything in particular to anyone. She opened her notebook. On the left side of a fresh page she wrote everything she knew: the contract, the mining rights, the cleared debts, Sylvia's letter and its careful architecture of suggestion, Edmund's watching, Vivienne's patience, the housekeeper's loyalty, which she had been quietly cultivating for 3 weeks with consistent courtesy, and the occasional specific question delivered at exactly the right moment. The footman who had been with the family for 11 years and who, she had noticed, looked to Edmund's comfort first and the household second and everyone else third. Not cruel, simply ranked, and she knew where she fell in that ranking. On the right side of the page, she wrote everything she needed. She looked at both sides for a long time. Then she turned to a new page and began to write a different kind of list. She started with the archive. The Cavendish family archive occupied the back third of the library, leather-bound ledgers and document boxes stacked on shelves that had not been properly organized since, as far as she could determine, the previous Duke's time. Edmund did not use the library. She had established this early on. The books showed no evidence of recent handling. The estate records were shelved without system, and the dust on the upper shelves was undisturbed in a way that told its own story about where the current Duke spent his time and where he did not, which meant that the archive was, effectively, hers. She had been working through it methodically, spending 2 hours each morning moving from one box to the next, reading and indexing and cross-referencing in the small, neat handwriting she had developed as a child doing her father's correspondence when the secretary was ill. She had a good mind for figures and a better one for patterns, for the way numbers in one ledger explained a gap in another, for the way correspondence revealed what the formal documents concealed. By the end of the reign, she had read 11 years of Cavendish estate records. What she found there was not what she had expected. The estate was in trouble. Not dramatically, not the kind of trouble that arrived with debt collectors and public scandal and the forced sale of silver. The quieter kind, the kind that accumulated over years through a series of individually defensible decisions that, taken together, pointed in a single direction. Agricultural income declining as tenant farming became less profitable and no alternative investment had been made. 3 significant repairs to the manor roof deferred for the 2nd consecutive year. The London house maintained at full staff cost despite being occupied fewer than 8 weeks annually. Legal fees, substantial, recurring, connected to a dispute over the northern boundary of the estate that had been running for 7 years without resolution. And the mining contract, £30,000 received, significant, but one time, and already, she suspected, allocated against existing obligations that the ledgers only partially revealed. Edmund knew. He must know he was not, as Vivienne had said, a stupid man. But knowing and solving were different problems, and the estate records suggested that the Duke of Cavendish had been managing the distance between those two problems for several years, with the particular skill of a man who was very good at maintaining appearances. She sat with this for a long time. She thought about the uniform, about a man who had sent his new wife to the servants' entrance before she had even crossed his threshold, not casually, not carelessly, but deliberately, with a note prepared in advance, with a plan. She thought about what Vivienne had told her. He was afraid I would leave. She thought about the architecture Edmund had built around himself, brick by careful brick, and she thought about what kind of man builds walls that high and that deliberate. A man who has watched someone leave before. A man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the safest position was the one from which he could not be surprised. She understood that. She did not excuse it, but she understood it. And understanding, it told her something useful. Edmund Cavendish did not know what to do with a woman who did not behave as expected. The uniform had been a test, perhaps unconscious, perhaps not, and she had failed to fail it, and now he did not know where to put her. That, she thought, was the beginning of a door. She did not intend to push it open, not yet, but she intended to know exactly where it was. She went to find Vivienne that morning with the notebook under her arm and a specific question she had been working toward for 2 weeks. The Dowager Duchess was awake. She was always awake early, another thing Margaret had come to rely on, and she looked at the notebook and then at Margaret and said nothing, simply waited with that particular patience of hers that had begun to feel, to Margaret, less like strategy and more like a form of respect. Margaret sat. She opened the notebook to the page with the 2 columns and set it on the table between them. Vivienne looked at it for a long moment. She read carefully and completely, which Margaret had expected. She did not rush, did not skim, gave the page the full attention it deserved. Then she looked up. "You have been busy," she said. "I have been reading," Margaret said. "The archive is extensive." Edmund does not use the library. No. His father did not either. Vivienne tilted her head slightly. His mother did, every morning before anyone else was awake, the same hours you keep. She paused. "I do not think that is a coincidence. I think the library knows who needs it." Margaret looked at her. "You said Edmund's mother did not die." She did not. Where is she? A long pause. The fire. The wind outside, gentler now that the rain had gone, moving through the grounds with the tentative quality of weather that is not sure of itself yet. Edinburgh, Vivienne said. She has been there for 22 years. She remarried. She has other children. She said this without inflection as one states a geography. Edmund does not know. He believes she died when he was 4. His father told him so. I allowed it. She met Margaret's eyes. That is the thing I will answer for in the end. The rest I can defend, that I cannot. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me now? Because you have a right to understand what you are married to, Vivienne said. Not Edmund specifically. What was made of him, the shape of the damage. Margaret looked at the fire. She thought about a 4-year-old boy being told his mother had died. She thought about what you built after that if no one stopped you from building the wrong things. The estate, she said finally, returning to the notebook. The finances. Edmund is managing a slow problem. Yes. The mining contract buys time. It does not solve anything. No. There are options, Margaret said. She turned to the next page of the notebook, where she had spent 3 mornings working through figures. The boundary dispute in the north, I found the original survey documents from 1831. The current legal argument is based on a map that post-dates that survey by 12 years and contains an error that I believe could be demonstrated with the original. The legal fees stop. The northern grazing land, which is currently idle, becomes viable again. She paused. The London house. At full staff year-round for a property occupied 8 weeks, the calculation is straightforward. A reduced household with a capable caretaker saves considerably. That money redirected to the roof repairs, which if deferred another year will become a substantially larger problem. She stopped. She looked at Vivienne. The old woman was watching her with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. Something in between. Something that had more history in it than Margaret could fully read. You did this in 3 weeks, Vivienne said. I had access to the archive, Margaret said. In time, and I am good with figures. Edmund does not know you are good with figures. Edmund, Margaret said, does not yet know a great number of things about me. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. He will resist it, the suggestions, the involvement. I know. He will see it as an encroachment, Margaret said. Yes, I know that too. She closed the notebook. I am not planning to present it to him as a suggestion. Vivienne raised an eyebrow. The solicitor who manages the boundary dispute, Margaret said, Mr. Alcott. He comes to the manor quarterly. His next visit is in 3 weeks. She folded her hands on the notebook. I would like to meet with him. Edmund will need to arrange that. Yes, Margaret said. He will, she paused. Will you help me? Vivienne looked at her for a long moment. Outside the sun had come fully up now, moving through the south windows of the west wing and laying a pale winter light across the floor between them. You understand, the old woman said slowly, that what you are proposing is not simply a financial reorganization. I know. You are proposing to become real, Vivienne said. In this house, in his life, you are proposing to matter in a way that cannot be undone. She held Margaret's gaze. That is considerably more frightening to him than any debt. I know that too, Margaret said quietly. A long silence. Then Vivienne reached across the small table and picked up Margaret's notebook and opened it to the financial pages and read through the figures one more time, slowly, completely, with the attention of someone who spent 60 years managing a household and understood exactly what she was looking at. She set it down. I will speak to Edmund, she said. About the solicitor, she paused. He will ask why. What will you tell him? The truth, said Vivienne, that his wife requested it, and that he should be paying considerably more attention to his wife. Edmund came to the library that afternoon. She heard him before she saw him. His footstep in the corridor had a particular quality, distinct from the household staff, something in the weight and rhythm of it that she had learned to recognize. She did not look up from the document she was reading. She waited. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She was aware of this the way one is aware of a change in light. "My grandmother tells me you would like to meet with Alcott," he said. "Yes," she said. She turned a page. "May I ask why?" She looked up then. He was standing with his hands behind his back in the posture she had come to think of as his formal posture, the one he used when he was managing something. She held his gaze steadily. "I found the original survey documents from 1831, she said. "The ones that predate the map your legal team has been working from. I believe there is an error in the later map that has been driving 7 years of unnecessary litigation." She paused. "I would like to show them to Mr. Alcott and hear his assessment." Edmund looked at her. The silence stretched. "You found them in the archive," he said. "Yes." "You have been working in the archive." "Every morning for 3 weeks." She held his gaze. "I told you I was using the library. You said it was my house." Something moved across his face. Not anger, she had braced for anger, had prepared for it, had 3 responses ready depending on how it arrived. But it was not anger. It was something more complicated than anger and considerably harder to read. "The 1831 survey," he said. "Show me." She rose. She went to the shelf and retrieved the document box she had replaced carefully that morning, and she set it on the table between them and opened it. And for the next 2 hours, Edmund Cavendish stood beside his wife in the cold, north-facing library and looked at documents he had not known existed, in an archive he had never used, found by a woman he did not yet know. He did not say much. He asked 3 precise questions, all of which she answered from memory, and she watched him read and recalculate and arrive. She could see it happening at the same conclusion she had reached. When he finished, he stood back from the table. "I will arrange the meeting with Alcott," he said. "Thank you." He did not move immediately. He stood looking at the document box with an expression she could not quite name, something with weight in it, something that had not been there when he walked in. "How long," he said, "did it take you to find this?" "I wasn't looking for it specifically," she said. "I was reading through the archive systematically. I came across it on the 9th morning." "The 9th morning?" He looked at her. "You have been reading through a 3-generation archive in 2 hours a day for 3 weeks." "I'm a thorough reader," she said. Another silence, longer this time. "Margaret," he said. She waited. He seemed to be working towards something. She could see it, the way she had learned to see his process of arriving at words, the particular stillness that preceded them. "The roof," he said finally, "the east wing, you will have noticed." She had noticed on her second day. A water stain on the ceiling of the upper corridor, pale brown and spreading, the unmistakable signature of a problem that had been left to develop. "Yes," she said carefully. "There are other things," he said. His voice was entirely even. "In the estate, things that require attention." "I know," she said. He looked at her sharply. "The ledgers," she said simply, "they are in the archive." Another long silence. She watched him process this, the fact of her knowledge, the extent of it, the weeks of quiet mornings it represented. "You should have told me," he said. "You should have asked," she said, quietly, without sharpness, simply as one states a truth. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "I am asking now." And Margaret Ashford, Duchess of Cavendish, opened her notebook to the page with the 2 columns and set it on the table between them, and for the first time since the morning of her wedding began to speak without editing herself. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not qualify or redirect or manage. He simply listened, with the focused and complete attention of a man who had just discovered that the most useful person in his house had been sitting across from him at breakfast every morning for 3 weeks, and he had not thought to ask her a single question. When she finished, the candles had burned low. He looked at the notebook for a long moment after she stopped speaking. Then he said, "How long have you been able to do this?" "Always," she said. He nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had only just begun to suspect. "I will need copies," he said, "of the figures if you are willing." "I'll have them for you by Friday," she said. He picked up his coat from the chair where he had set it 2 hours ago, and he moved toward the door, and then stopped with his hand on the frame, and stood there for a moment with his back to her. "The uniform," he said. She waited. "It was wrong," he said, very quietly, with the particular difficulty of a man for whom those words cost something real. "What I did, it was wrong." She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the effort visible in them. "Yes," she said, "it was." She did not say, "It's all right." She did not say, "I forgive you." She was not ready to say either of those things, and she would not say them before she was ready. But she did not look away. He left. His footstep moved down the corridor and faded. Margaret stood alone in the library with her notebook and the low candles and the old smell of paper and stone, and she breathed slowly and evenly and looked at nothing in particular for a long moment. Then she sat down, opened the notebook to a new page, and began writing the copies he had asked for. She worked until the candles went out. Sylvia left on a Saturday. Margaret knew she was leaving before the trunks appeared in the corridor. She had felt it building for 2 days, a shift in the household's atmosphere, a tightening, the way air changes before weather. Sylvia had been watching. She had watched the library meeting from a distance she could not have named, but Margaret could feel the particular attention of someone recalculating. The solicitor meeting had happened on Thursday. Mr. Alcott had arrived at 10, a thin, precise man in his 60s who had been managing Cavendish legal affairs for 20 years and who looked at Margaret when she entered the study with the careful blankness of a professional who had learned not to show surprise. Edmund had introduced her without qualifier. "Not my wife wishes to observe, or the Duchess will be joining us briefly, but simply, my wife. She found the documents. You should hear it from her." Alcott had heard it from her. He had asked 4 questions, all good ones, and she had answered them fully, and at the end he had sat back in his chair and looked at the 1831 survey spread across Edmund's desk and said, with the measured restraint of a man who did not like to be wrong but was professional enough to say so when he was, "I believe the Duchess may be correct." Edmund had said nothing, but she had felt it, something in the room, something in the quality of his stillness beside her that was different from his usual stillness, less defended, more present. Sylvia had been in the morning room when they emerged from the study. She had looked at them, at the two of them together, at whatever was visible in the way they moved through the same space, and something had passed across her face so quickly that Margaret almost missed it. Almost. The morning Sylvia's trunks appeared, Margaret came down to breakfast and found Edmund already at the table, correspondence in hand as usual, but not reading it. He was looking at the window. The correspondence sat open and unattended beside his cup. She sat, the footman poured her tea. She added milk. "Sylvia is leaving this morning," Edmund said, still looking at the window. "I know," Margaret said. He looked at her then. "You knew she was going." "I suspected, yesterday." She picked up her cup. "She has been reconsidering her visit since Thursday." A pause, "Since the meeting with Alcott." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Did something happen between you and Sylvia while she was here?" Margaret set down her cup. She looked at him directly, the way she had learned to look at him, not challenging, not soft, simply clear. "Do you want an honest answer or a comfortable one?" Something shifted in his expression. I have never asked you for a comfortable answer." "No," she said, "you haven't." She paused. "Nothing happened between us directly. She is too careful for that." She considered her words. "She came here with a purpose. I don't believe the purpose is working anymore, so she is leaving." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. "What purpose?" "To remind you of something," Margaret said carefully. "Of a time before, of what was familiar." She held his gaze. "And perhaps to establish that I was not." The silence that followed was long enough that the fire shifted and settled, and the footman moved quietly in the background, and neither of them looked away. "She wrote to me," Edmund said finally. "Before she arrived, I should tell you that." "I know," Margaret said. His eyes sharpened. "How?" She reached into the pocket of her morning dress and set the letter on the table between them. He looked at it. He did not touch it immediately. He looked at it the way one looks at something one has been hoping would not exist. "Where did you get this?" "It was left in my room," she said. "I don't know by whom. I have my suspicions, but I cannot confirm them." "How long have you had it?" "Since the 4th day of her visit." He looked up. "You had this for a week and said nothing." "I was deciding what to do with it," she said. "I have decided." "Which is?" "To give it to you," she said, "and let you do what you think is right." She paused. "I am not going to manage your relationships for you, Edmund. I am not going to tell you what to feel about someone you have known for years. I am only going to tell you what I know, and what I know is that this letter was written before she arrived, and it describes a plan, and the plan concerns me." He picked up the letter. She watched him read it. She had read it enough times to know it by heart, to know exactly where his jaw would tighten, and where his expression would close, and where, near the bottom of the 2nd page, something would happen in his eyes that she had not seen before and could not fully name. He set it down. He did not speak for a long time, long enough that she began to wonder if she had miscalculated, if she had given it to him too soon, too directly, if he would close around it the way he closed around everything, and she would lose the careful inch of ground she had gained in the library. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." She waited. "Not for the letter," he said. "That is, I will address that separately. I mean for—" He stopped. He looked at the table. For the first time since she had known him, he looked, very briefly, uncertain. For the weeks before the solicitor, for not another stop. "I was not paying attention," he said finally, "to what was in this house, to what you were doing. I was not paying attention, and I should have been." Margaret looked at him carefully. "That is a partial apology," she said. "It accounts for the last 3 weeks. It does not account for the first morning." He met her eyes. "No," he said, "it does not." "I'm not asking you to account for it now," she said. "I'm asking you to know that I haven't forgotten it, and that a partial apology, while appreciated, is not a complete one." Something moved across his face, something that in a less defended man she might have called shame. "Understood," he said quietly. She nodded. She picked up her tea. "Tell me about Sylvia," she said. "Not what happened between you. I don't need that. Tell me what she means to you now, what she represents." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I am your wife," she said simply, "and I would like to understand the people in your life. And because—" she paused, choosing this carefully, "because I think you have been carrying things alone for a very long time, and I am not asking you to stop. I am only asking you to know that you don't have to." The silence after that was different from the other silences. Less defended. Something in it that had not been there before, a quality she could not quite name, something tentative and careful, like the first morning after a long rain. Edmund looked at the window for a moment, then he looked at his hands, then he looked at her. "Sylvia," he said slowly, "represents a time when I believed things were simple." He paused. "I was 23. I thought I understood what I wanted. I thought I understood." He stopped again. "I did not understand very much." "What happened?" "I ended it," he said. "Not she. He was quiet. I ended it because I realized that what I felt for her was comfortable, and I did not know at 23 that comfortable was worth something. A pause. I thought I was waiting for something larger. Were you? He looked at her directly. I don't know yet, he said. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he had said to her. Sylvia came to find Margaret before she left. Margaret was in the morning room with a book she wasn't reading when Sylvia appeared in the doorway, already dressed for travel, her composure perfect and her eyes, for the first time, doing something unscripted. I am leaving, Sylvia said. I know, Margaret said. I hope your journey is comfortable. A pause. Sylvia looked at her with those careful eyes and something beneath them that was working very hard. You are not what I expected, she said finally. No, Margaret agreed. I don't think I am. I want you to know, Sylvia started again. The letter, I wrote it because I was, she stopped again. Afraid, Margaret said quietly. Sylvia looked at her. You were afraid, Margaret said, that he had made a mistake, that he was in a situation that would make him unhappy. Those are not entirely selfish fears. She paused. The method was wrong, but I understand the fear. Sylvia was quiet for a long moment. You are very strange, she said finally. So I've been told, said Margaret. Something crossed Sylvia's face that might in different circumstances have been the beginning of a smile. Then it was gone. She straightened her gloves. Take care of him, she said. Not a command, not quite a plea, something in between. I intend to, Margaret said, in my own way. Sylvia nodded once. She turned to leave and then stopped. He waited, she said, without turning around. After the engagement, he waited for something for years. A pause. I always thought he was waiting for me to come back. She was quiet for a moment. I don't think that anymore. She left. Margaret listened to her footsteps move down the corridor, and the sound of the entrance hall below, and the eventual crunch of carriage wheels on gravel. Then she sat for a long time with her book unopened in her lap and thought about waiting, about the different kinds of waiting, about a man who had sent a servant's uniform to his bride on their wedding morning, and what kind of waiting that represented not patience, not hope, but the waiting of someone who has decided in advance that things will go wrong and is simply managing the timing of it. She thought about what it would mean to be the thing that didn't go wrong. She was not sure she was ready for that. She was not sure he was ready for it either. But she thought, for the first time, that they might be moving in the same direction. 3 days after Sylvia left, Edmund did not come to dinner. Mrs. Hartley informed Margaret at 7:30 that the Duke had been in his study since noon and had not emerged. Margaret ate dinner alone, which was not unusual, and read afterward in the drawing room, which was also not unusual, and went to bed at 10. She lay awake. At 11:30, she heard his footstep in the corridor. It stopped outside her door. She lay still. The fire in her room had burned low. The house was entirely quiet around them, that deep, specific quiet of a large house well after midnight, when even the last of the staff had gone to bed and there was nothing left but the building itself, breathing. He knocked. Not loudly. A single knock, restrained, with the particular quality of a sound made by someone who is not certain they should be making it. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the uniform, about the contract, about 3 weeks of breakfasts where he had not asked her a single question, about the library and the survey and I am asking now, about Sylvia's letter and the partial apology and I don't know yet. She thought about his mother in Edinburgh, about a 4-year-old boy told she had died, about the architecture of a man built around a wound that had never been correctly named. She thought about what Vivienne had said. You wore that uniform and came down those stairs anyway. She was not ready to open the door. She knew that, she was clear about that. But she was also, she realized, lying completely still and not sleeping, listening to the silence on the other side of the door with more attention than she had given to anything in weeks. She did not open the door, but she did not call out and tell him to leave either. She lay still and listened, and on the other side of the door Edmund Cavendish stood in the dark corridor and did not knock again, and did not leave, and the house held them both in its particular quiet, and the fire burned lower, and neither of them moved for a very long time. In the morning, when Dora came to wake her, she found a note that had been slid under the door. 3 words in Edmund's handwriting. "I am sorry. Not partial this time." She held it for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer of the nightstand beside the first note, the one with the uniform, the one she had never thrown away. She did not know yet what she would do with either of them. But she kept them both. She did not mention the note at breakfast. Neither did he. They ate in the usual way, Edmund with his correspondence, Margaret with her tea and the particular composure she had developed over weeks of mornings in this room. And the note sat between them in the silence like a third presence, something that had been said and could not be unsaid, something that changed the temperature of the room without either of them acknowledging it. She had decided, lying awake in the early hours before Dora arrived, that she would not be the one to open it, not because she was punishing him. She had examined that possibility carefully and set it aside, because punishment required a kind of sustained anger she did not feel and would not perform. But because she had learned in the months of this marriage that Edmund Cavendish moved toward things in his own time, and that pushing him produced not progress but a very elegant and impenetrable withdrawal, and she was not interested in withdrawal. She was interested in what was on the other side of it. So she drank her tea and looked at the winter garden through the window and waited. He turned a page of his correspondence, then turned it back, then set the whole thing down. "I would like to tell you something," he said. She looked at him, all right. He was looking at the table, not at her, not yet. His hands were flat on the surface on either side of his plate, a posture she had not seen before, something in it that was neither his formal stillness nor his recalculating stillness, but something rower than either, something that looked like a man who had made a decision in the night, and was now living with the consequences of it in the morning light. "Not here," he said, "not at the table." He looked up. "Would you walk with me after breakfast? The grounds are clear this morning." She looked at him for a moment. At the effort visible in the question, the way it had cost him something to ask it directly, without arrangement, without the formal structure he usually built around himself. "Yes," she said, "I'll get my coat." The grounds of Cavendish Manor in December were austere and beautiful in the way that things stripped to their structure are beautiful. The formal gardens reduced to geometry, the long lawn pale with frost, the tree line at the eastern edge black against a sky that had not decided yet what kind of day it intended to be. They walked without direction at first, side by side, not touching, with the particular distance between them that had characterized all their movement together, close enough to be unmistakably together, far enough to be unmistakably not yet. Margaret did not rush him. She had learned that silence with Edmund was not emptiness. It was where he did his real work. They reached the far end of the formal garden before he spoke. "My mother," he said. She kept walking, kept her pace even, yes. "My grandmother told you." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. They turned along the garden's edge, following the low stone wall that divided the formal grounds from the kitchen garden beyond. The frost crunched faintly under their feet. "What did she tell you?" "That your mother did not die," Margaret said carefully. "That she left when you were 4. That your father told you she had died." She paused. "That she is in Edinburgh." He nodded, a small, contained movement. "I found out when I was 19, he said. "There was a letter, misdirected. It was meant for my grandmother, I think, or perhaps my father, but he had been dead 2 years by then, and it came to me." He paused. "It was from her. She had heard of my father's death and she wrote to I don't know, express something, offer something. His voice was entirely even. She had noticed he was most controlled when he was most affected. I did not reply. Did you want to? A long pause. I wanted to know why, he said. That is all I wanted, not a relationship, not a reunion. I simply wanted to understand why a person, why a mother. He stopped. Why she left, Margaret said quietly. Yes. Did you ever find out? No, he looked at the tree line. I burned the letter. I have spent 20 years being very controlled about not finding out. Margaret walked beside him and did not fill the silence that followed. She let it be what it was, not empty, not uncomfortable, but the silence of something large and old being set down carefully in the open air where it could be looked at. The uniform, he said finally. She waited. I need you to understand something about that morning, he said. Not to excuse it. I am not asking you to excuse it. I know what it was. I have known, since the moment my grandmother walked through that door, exactly what it was. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He turned to look at her. Directly, fully, with none of the managed distance she had grown accustomed to. His face in the winter light was older than she usually perceived it, not aged, but weighted, the face of someone carrying something he had carried for a very long time. I have done this before, he said, not the uniform specifically, but the arrangement of circumstances in advance, the testing. He said the word with something close to disgust. With Sylvia, with other women before. I find a way to make something go wrong before it can go wrong on its own. He held her gaze. Do you understand what I mean? Yes, she said. I understand exactly what you mean. I knew when I sent that uniform, he said, that any reasonable woman would refuse to wear it, would send it back, would arrive at that ceremony in her own clothes and with her own anger, and we would begin this marriage in open conflict, which I know how to manage, which has clear positions and clear rules, which, he stopped. Which is safe, he said, in a specific way, a cold way. But I wore it, Margaret said. You wore it, he said, and came down the stairs, and I looked at you and I did not know what to do with that. Something moved in his expression. You were not what I had arranged for. I had arranged for a particular kind of beginning, and you refused to give it to me, and I have spent every day since then. He stopped, looked away briefly, looked back, trying to understand what kind of woman walks into a room full of people in a servant's uniform and looks like that. Like what? She said. Like she has already decided something, he said. Like the room and everyone in it is simply scenery, and she is the only person there who knows what play is being performed. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I was terrified, she said. He looked at her. On those stairs, she said. I was absolutely terrified. I had been terrified since the moment I opened that box and found the uniform inside. She held his gaze. I wore it because I refused to give you the satisfaction of seeing that, and because I had decided somewhere on the upper landing that if this was what you intended this marriage to be, I would not make it easy for you. She paused. That is not composure. That is stubbornness dressed as composure. Something happened in his face. Something she had not seen before, a loosening, very small, almost imperceptible, but real. I think, he said slowly, that may be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. You have not been asking honest things, she said, not unkindly. No, he said, I have not. They stood in the frost at the edge of the formal garden and looked at each other with the particular attention of two people who have been in the same house for months and are only now, finally, actually seeing each other. Your mother, Margaret said carefully, when she left, how much do you remember of before? He was quiet for a long moment. Enough, he said. Enough to know it was not that it did not come from nowhere. There was the house was not a peaceful house. My father was not, he stopped. He was not a cruel man, he was a cold one, and cold men do not always know the damage they are doing because they are not doing anything precisely. They are simply absent, in a way that fills every room they're in. Margaret thought about her father, about the way he had stood in that entrance hall and turned his face away. "I know something about that," she said. "I know you do," he said. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, without elaboration, told her that he had been paying more attention than she had realized. That while she had been watching him across breakfast tables and in library doorways and through the careful architecture of their daily distance, he had been watching her too. "Edmund," she said, "your mother's letter, do you remember, was there a return address?" He looked at her, something careful in his expression. "Why?" "Because you said you wanted to know why," she said. "You said that is all you wanted, not a reunion, not a relationship, simply to understand." She held his gaze. "You burned the letter, but your grandmother has lived in this house for 60 years and she knows everything that exists in it." She paused. "I think if you asked her, she might know how to reach your mother." The silence that followed was the longest of the morning. A bird moved through the bare branches of the tree line. The frost on the grass caught the light that had finally decided to emerge from the cloud cover, turning the whole lawn briefly silver. The cold was sharp and clean and real. "I don't know," he said finally, "if I am ready for that." "I know," she said. "I'm not telling you to do it. I'm telling you the option exists." She paused. "You have been managing the not knowing for 20 years. I am simply suggesting that the not knowing is a choice and choices can be changed." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are a very unusual woman," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I've been told." Something moved in his expression, something that in a less defended man, in an earlier version of this man, might have arrived more easily. It arrived slowly, working its way through layers of careful construction, but it arrived. The beginning, unmistakable, of something warm. "I would like," he stopped, started again. "I would like to know you better," he said. "I am aware that this is something I should have said months ago. I am aware that saying it now, after everything, may not, I do not know what it may or may not." He stopped. She had never heard him falter this many times in a single conversation. It was, she thought, the most real he had ever sounded. "I am not good at this," he said simply. "I know," she said. "Neither am I, particularly. I am good at managing things and reading archives and being stubborn in staircases. Personal disclosure is considerably less natural for me than I may have made it appear." He looked at her. "You have seemed very certain." "I have worked very hard to seem very certain," she said. "That is a different thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly he said, Is this?" He stopped, looked at the frost on the ground, looked up. "Are you unhappy here?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "No," she said finally. "I am not unhappy. I am unfinished." She looked at him. "This is not yet what it could be, but I do not think that is a fixed condition." He held her gaze. "No," he said, "I don't think it is either." They walked back slowly. Through the formal garden and along the gravel path that curved around the south face of the manor, past the windows of the library where she had spent her mornings, past the music room where he had sat with Sylvia in the rain. The sun was fully out now, doing what December sun does, present but reserved, offering light without warmth, illuminating everything without committing to it. At the door, Edmund stopped and held it open for her. She passed through, paused in the entrance hall, remembering another morning in this hall, the stairs, the uniform, 40 people, and the sound of silence spreading through them like water. "Edmund," she said without turning. "Yes." "The note you put under my door," she paused. "I kept it." She did not turn around. She did not need to see his face to know what happened in it. She had learned by now to read him in other ways, in the quality of his silence, in the particular stillness that followed certain words. This stillness was different from his usual kind. "I kept the first one too," she said, "the one with the uniform." "Why?" he said very quietly. She considered this. "Because I think someday I will want to show our children," she said, "the distance we traveled." She climbed the stairs. Behind her, Edmund Cavendish stood in the entrance hall of his family's house and did not move for a very long time. That evening, for the first time since the wedding, he came to dinner early. He was already at the table when she arrived, which had never happened before. He rose when she entered, which was not required, not between a husband and wife in their own dining room, and waited until she was seated before he sat again. She looked at him across the table. He looked at her. The footman poured the wine. The first course arrived. The candles burned in the center of the table between them, and outside the December dark had settled over Cavendish Manor, and the house was quiet around them in its particular way. "Tell me something," Edmund said, "something I don't know about you." She looked at him. "That is a broad request." "Yes," he said, "it is intentionally broad." She picked up her glass, considered. "I can play the pianoforte," she said. "Quite well, actually. Better than quite well. My mother taught me before she died, and I have practiced every day since I was 7 years old through every house we lived in, regardless of whether the instrument was in tune, which it frequently was not." She paused. "No one here knows that. I have not gone near the music room." "Why not?" "Because Sylvia was in it," she said simply. Something moved in his expression, that almost warmth again, closer to the surface now. "She is gone," he said. "Yes," Margaret said, "she is." "The music room," he said carefully, "has the best instrument in the county. My grandmother insisted on it." He paused. "It has been a long time since anyone used it properly." "Has it?" she said. "A very long time." She looked at him across the candlelight. "Tell me something I don't know about you," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "I cannot sleep when the house is silent," he said. "I need to hear it, the settling, the wind, the sounds of it. When I was a boy, I used to lie awake counting them." He paused. "I still do, occasionally." She thought about a 4-year-old boy in a room much like hers, in a house that had just become less than it was, counting sounds in the dark. "I do the same," she said quietly. "I have done it since my mother died. The house sounds are proof of something, that things continue." He looked at her. "That things continue," he repeated. "Yes." The candles burned between them. Outside, Cavendish Manor made its sounds, the settling of old stone, the wind at the high windows, the particular vocabulary of a house that had stood for 200 years and intended to stand for 200 more. They listened to it together. It was, Margaret thought, the closest thing to peace she had felt since she arrived. She went to Vivienne after dinner. The old woman was waiting. She was always waiting, which had stopped feeling like strategy and started feeling like the most reliable thing in the house. Margaret sat and accepted her tea and said nothing for a moment, which was also, by now, a kind of language between them. "He told me about his mother," Margaret said, "what he knows, what he doesn't." "I wondered if he would," Vivienne said. "He doesn't know that she's reachable," Margaret said. "He burned the letter. He thinks the option is closed." "And you told him it might not be." "Yes." Vivienne looked at the fire. "He may not be ready," she said. "It took him 20 years to say her name out loud. Whatever he told you today cost him something considerable." "I know," Margaret said. "I'm not pushing. I simply wanted him to know the door exists." She paused. "Do you have a way to reach her, his mother?" A long silence. "Yes," Vivienne said. "I have written to her twice in 20 years. She knows about Edmund. She has always known." She was quiet for a moment. "She did not leave because she did not love him. I want you to understand that. She left because staying was making her into something she did not recognize, and she was afraid of what that thing might do." Margaret sat with that. "Does he know that?" "No." "He needs to," Margaret said. "I know," said Vivienne. "I have known for 20 years. She looked at Margaret with those dark eyes. "I was waiting for someone to be in a position to tell him." "You were waiting for me," Margaret said. I was waiting for whoever arrived who was strong enough to hold the information without flinching, Vivienne said. It took some time. She paused. You will know when he is ready. You are better at reading him than anyone I have seen. He is not easy to read. No, Vivienne agreed. He is not. He is his father's architecture and his mother's absence and 20 years of managing both without any real assistance. She paused. He is also, underneath all of that, quite remarkable. His father was not remarkable. Edmund is. She looked at Margaret steadily. I believe you are beginning to see that. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, I am beginning to see it. Good, said Vivienne. She poured more tea. Margaret accepted it. Outside, the December night had settled fully over Cavendish Manor, cold and clear and deep, and the stars were visible for the first time in weeks through the west wing windows, and the house made its sounds around them a proof, as Margaret had said, that things continue. She sat with the old woman until the fire burned low. Neither of them said anything further. Neither of them needed to. That night, lying awake in the south-facing room that had become, over months, genuinely hers, her books on the shelves, her notebook on the writing desk, her mother's miniature portrait on the mantelpiece where she had placed it on her second week, and no one had moved, Margaret stared at the ceiling and listened to Cavendish Manor settle around her and thought about distance traveled. She thought about a servant's uniform laid across a bed. She thought about a staircase and 40 people, and the decision made at the top of it. She thought about an archive and a candle and 7 years of unnecessary legal fees, and a man standing in a library looking at a document that might save his estate, put there by a woman he had not yet thought to ask a single question. She thought about Edinburgh and a letter burned, and 20 years of carefully managed not knowing, and the particular way a man knocks on a door at past 11, when he is not certain he should be knocking. She thought about what Vivienne had said about Edmund's mother. She left because staying was making her into something she did not recognize. She thought about herself, about who she had been in her father's house, careful, contained, performing an endless management of other people's comfort at the expense of her own. About who she was becoming here in this house, in this strange and difficult and slowly opening life. She was not that woman anymore, the one from her father's house. Something had changed on that staircase, not the wearing of the uniform, which had been stubbornness, as she had told him, pure stubbornness dressed as composure, but the decision at the top of it. The moment she had looked at the entrance hall below and made a choice about what kind of woman she was going to be in this marriage. She had chosen to be real. It was, she thought, the most frightening thing she had ever done. She was still choosing it. Every morning, every breakfast, every candle-lit dinner where Edmund Cavendish asked her to tell him something he didn't know, and listened with the full, careful attention of a man who was slowly, at great personal cost, learning how to be present. She turned on her side. The drawer of the nightstand was an inch from her face. She knew what was in it. 2 pieces of paper folded, one with a servant's uniform, one with 3 words. She thought about what she had said on the stairs, the distance we traveled. She closed her eyes. She slept. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. A cream envelope, heavy paper, the kind that announced its own importance before it was opened. It was addressed to the Duke and Duchess of Cavendish, which was correct and usual, and it was from Lady Harwick, which was also usual. The Harwicks hosted the largest winter ball in the county, had done so for 30 years, and the invitation was expected. What was not expected was the smaller note tucked inside the envelope beneath the formal card, written in a hand Margaret did not recognize, unsigned, 4 words. She is not ready. She read it twice, set it on the breakfast table beside the cream card, looked at it with the particular stillness she brought to things that required careful thought. She did not show it to Edmund. Not because she intended to conceal it, But because she needed to understand it first, and understanding required time, and time required that she not react immediately, which she had learned was the first and most important rule of managing something designed to provoke a reaction. Someone wanted her off balance before the Harwick ball. She put both pieces of paper in her pocket, ate her breakfast, and went to the library. She found Vivienne before noon. The old woman looked at the unsigned note for a long time. Her expression did not change, which told Margaret something, not that she recognized the hand, but that she recognized the method. "Sylvia," Margaret said. "Or someone acting for her," Vivienne said. "She is careful enough not to write it herself." She set the note down. "She was at the Harwick estate last week. Lady Harwick is her godmother." Margaret absorbed this. What does she intend to do at the ball? "What she could not do here," Vivienne said. "Here she was in Edmund's house on his ground with me present. At the Harwick ball she is on neutral territory, in a room full of people whose opinions she has been cultivating for years." She paused. "She intends to make a public case." "For what?" "That you are unsuitable," Vivienne said simply. "That Edmund made a hasty match under financial pressure and has since realized his mistake. She will not say this directly, she is far too skilled for that. She will say it through implication, through the careful placement of doubts, through the look she exchanges with people who already trust her." She looked at Margaret. "She had weeks in this house to gather material. She is not a stupid woman." "No," Margaret said, "she isn't." "The question," Vivienne said, "is what you intend to do about it." Margaret looked at the note on the table between them. She thought about the Harwick ball, a room full of strangers who had formed their opinions of her before she arrived, shaped by whispers she had not been present to counter. She thought about walking into that room as the woman who had descended a staircase in a servant's uniform on her wedding morning, because that story had not stayed within Cavendish Manor. Stories never did. She thought about 40 people and the sound of silence spreading. "I am going to need a dress," she said. She went to Edmund that afternoon. He was in his study. She knocked, which she had begun doing, which was itself a change from the early weeks when she had been careful to stay out of rooms that felt like his territory. He said, "Come in," and she did, and she closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from his desk, which she had also begun doing, because the chair across from his desk was where useful conversations happened, and she had decided to treat it as hers. She set the invitation and the unsigned note on the desk between them. He read both. His face did what it did when he was processing something that required careful management, very still, very controlled, something working behind it. "When did this arrive?" "This morning." "You waited until now to show me." "I was thinking," she said. He looked at the note for a moment longer. "Sylvia." "Almost certainly." "I will send our regrets," he said. He reached for his pen. "No," she said. He looked up. "We are going," she said. "Both of us. We are going, and we are going to arrive together, and I am going to be exactly what I am, and Sylvia is going to have to manage that in person rather than through unsigned notes delivered in invitation envelopes." She held his gaze. "I am not going to spend this marriage avoiding rooms because someone has arranged them against me. I did not avoid the entrance hall on our wedding morning. I am not avoiding the Harwick ball." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need?" he said. "I told your grandmother, a dress," she paused, "and I need you to be present, not managing the room, not working it, present with me, whatever happens." He held her gaze steadily. "I will be there," he said. "I know you will be there," she said. "I need you to be with me. There is a difference." The distinction landed. She watched it land, watched him absorb it, the specific request underneath it, the thing she was actually asking for, which was not an appearance or a performance but a choosing, in public, in front of people, a choosing of her. "Yes," he said, "I understand the difference." She nodded. She stood. "There is one more thing," she said. He waited. Whatever Sylvia says that evening, whatever is said about me to me, in front of me, I need you to trust me to handle it. She looked at him directly. I do not need rescuing. I need to know you are standing beside me while I handle it myself. Edmund looked at her with an expression she had come to think of as his real face, not the formal face, not the managed face, but the one that appeared when he had stopped calculating and was simply responding. It was a better face, considerably better. She was glad she had stayed long enough to see it. I have been watching you handle things since the morning of our wedding, he said quietly. I would not dream of rescuing you. She allowed herself briefly a smile. Good, she said. Then we are going to the Harwick ball. The dress arrived from London 4 days later. Vivienne had arranged it. Margaret did not ask how, because Vivienne had been arranging things in this county for 60 years, and the mechanisms of her arrangements were not always traceable, and Margaret had learned to simply accept them with gratitude. The dressmaker was someone Vivienne trusted. The fabric was deep blue, the color of the sky at the precise moment before full dark, and it was cut simply, without excessive ornamentation, which Margaret had specified because she did not need ornamentation and knew it. She tried it on alone, in the south-facing room in the afternoon light. She stood in front of the glass for a long time. She thought about a servant's uniform, about the specific deliberate humiliation of it, the buttons, the stiff cotton, the note pinned to the collar. She thought about the woman who had put it on and walked down a staircase and decided something at the top of it. This was the same woman. She had not become someone else. She had simply been given, slowly and at considerable cost, the space to be more fully herself. She thought that was enough. It was, in fact, more than she had arrived expecting. They went on a Friday evening. The Harwick estate was 20 minutes by carriage, a Georgian house lit up against the December dark, windows blazing, the sound of an orchestra reaching them before they arrived. Other carriages on the drive. The sound of a large gathering already underway. Edmund handed her down from the carriage himself. She had noticed he had started doing this, small things, deliberate things, the accumulated language of a man who was learning a new vocabulary. She did not comment on them. She simply received them. They walked in together. The Harwick ball was everything the Harwick ball was reputed to be. Large, bright, loud in the particular way of rooms where everyone is performing at once. The orchestra at the far end providing a current of music beneath the surface of conversation. The whole thing arranged with the practiced ease of a hostess who had done this for 30 years and found it effortless. Lady Harwick received them at the entrance with a smile that told Margaret everything she needed to know about the last 3 weeks. It was not an unfriendly smile. It was a smile that had already formed a conclusion and was being polite about it. Your Grace, she said to Edmund, and the Duchess. A small pause before the title, nearly imperceptible, not to Margaret. Lady Harwick, Margaret said warmly, because warmth here was more dangerous to Sylvia's project than anything else. What a beautiful house. I have heard so much about your winter ball. I have been looking forward to this evening tremendously. Lady Harwick's smile adjusted slightly. She had been prepared, Margaret suspected, for something easier to manage. We are delighted you are here, she said. They moved into the room. Sylvia was there, of course. She was standing near the fireplace at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by people who clearly enjoyed being near her, in a gown the color of champagne that had been chosen with the same awareness of effect that characterized everything Sylvia did. She saw them enter. Margaret watched her see them, the precise moment of recognition, the small recalibration, the smile that arrived a half-second after it should have. Margaret filed that half-second away. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in patience. She moved through the room with Edmund beside her, genuinely beside her, she noted, not a step ahead, not navigating independently, beside her. and she met people and remembered their names and asked them questions they found flattering, and listened to their answers with the attention she brought to everything. She was introduced to Lady Harwick's circle and Edmund's county neighbors, and several people who were clearly measuring her against a description they had received in advance, and she gave them something that contradicted the description without ever referring to it. She was not performing. That was the thing she had decided in the carriage. She was not going to perform a version of herself designed to counter Sylvia's narrative. She was simply going to be what she was, which was, she had come to understand, sufficiently unusual that it tended to confuse people's preconceptions. Sylvia circled. She was skillful about it. She did not approach directly. She worked through the room in a pattern that brought her gradually closer, catching Edmund's eye across a distance, sharing a smile with someone in their group, making herself gradually present without ever quite arriving. It was, Margaret thought, beautifully executed. She watched it happen and said nothing. The moment came, as she had known it would, just after the supper interval. The room had rearranged itself in the way that rooms do after supper, smaller groupings, more settled, the formality of arrival having given way to the comfort of a long evening. Sylvia appeared at Margaret's side with the smoothness of someone who had been timing it. "Margaret," she said warmly, "I have been hoping to speak with you all evening." "And here we are," Margaret said pleasantly. They were in a cluster of 6 or 7 county women, mostly, the kind who had known Edmund since childhood and knew Sylvia considerably better. The group had the slightly heightened attention of people who had been anticipating something. "I was so hoping," Sylvia said to the group as much as to Margaret, "that you were settling in well at the manor. It is such a particular house, not everyone finds it comfortable. It requires a certain familiarity, I think, with that world." A pause, light, perfectly weighted. "How are you finding the social obligations? There is rather a lot expected, I know, from the Duchess of Cavendish. Edmund's mother found it overwhelming, as I recall." The mention of Edmund's mother was deliberate. Margaret heard the blade in it, the invitation to defensive reaction, the implication of a pattern, the reminder before this audience that the position of Duchess of Cavendish had not always been filled successfully. The women in the group were watching. Margaret smiled. "I find the obligations interesting, actually," she said, in the same warm and easy tone. "I have been spending a great deal of time in the estate archive. The history of the house is extraordinary, 3 generations of records, going back to the original land grant." She paused, as if remembering something pleasant. "We recently resolved a boundary dispute that has been running for 7 years. The original survey from 1831 had never been properly cross-referenced. It was simply a matter of looking carefully." She looked at Sylvia with an expression of perfect friendliness. "I find that most things, when you look carefully enough at them, become quite clear." The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Sylvia held her smile. "How industrious," she said. "Edmund always says I am thorough," Margaret said, which was not true. Edmund had not yet said this, though she thought he might, eventually, but which sounded true in the way that things sound true when they fit a larger reality. "He has been very encouraging." She felt Edmund beside her. She had not looked at him, had kept her eyes on Sylvia, but she felt him. Felt the particular quality of his stillness, which was not his managed stillness or his formal stillness, but something else, something she had not felt from him in a public room before. She felt him standing with her. She turned briefly and found him looking at her with that real face, the one without calculation, the one she had spent months earning, and something in it that she would not name yet, not here, not in this room, but that she would think about later in the south-facing room with the fire and the nightstand drawer and the 2 folded pieces of paper. She turned back to the group. "I am very glad we came this evening," she said warmly to Sylvia and the women around her. "It is so important, I think, to know one's neighbors properly." She looked at Sylvia with eyes that were entirely clear and entirely without malice. "Don't you agree?" Sylvia looked at her. For the first time all evening, for the first time, Margaret thought, in all the weeks she had known her, Sylvia Holt looked at Margaret Ashford Cavendish and found nothing to work with. "Of course," she said after a moment, "quite right." It was Vivienne who ended it. Margaret had not known she was coming. She had sent no word, made no mention, given no indication in their conversation 3 days prior that she intended to leave the manor for the first time in 2 years. But at 9:30 the doors of the Harwick ballroom opened, and a small woman in gray with a cane that struck the parquet floor with the authority of someone who did not recognize the concept of an entrance made without intent, crossed the room with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who was going exactly where she meant to go. The room noticed. The room always noticed Vivienne Cavendish. It was one of the reliable facts of the county. She moved through the crowd, which parted as it always did, with that instinctive deference that very old authority commands. And she arrived beside Margaret, and she stopped, and she looked at the group, and she said nothing for a moment, simply looked, with those dark eyes that missed nothing and never had. Then she took Margaret's hand. Not briefly, not formally. She took it and held it deliberately in the way of someone making a statement that does not require words. Lady Harwick appeared from across the room, drawn by some hostess instinct. "Dowager Duchess, we had no idea you would be joining us this evening." "I came to see my granddaughter," Vivienne said. She said it simply, without emphasis, without performance. Granddaughter. Not granddaughter-in-law asterisk, not Edmund's wife asterisk, granddaughter. The word landed in the room and spread outward the way things spread in rooms like this, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Margaret felt it move through the group, felt it reach Sylvia, felt the particular quality of the silence it produced. She felt Vivienne's hand holding hers, small, firm, warm. She thought about a woman who had arrived at a wedding she had not been invited to because she recognized, in a girl descending a staircase in a servant's uniform, something worth arriving for. She thought about all the things Vivienne had given her that were not about strategy or position, the tea, the fire, the patience, the specific quality of being seen. She held the old woman's hand and did not look at Sylvia. She did not need to. Edmund took a step closer, and she felt that too, the specific warmth of him beside her, the choosing of her that was not a performance for the room but something real, something he had been working toward since the morning he stood in the entrance hall and could not explain to himself why a woman in a servant's uniform had looked like. She already knew something he did not. Lady Harwick said something welcoming. People rearranged themselves. The orchestra began again. Sylvia stepped back. She did it gracefully. She was always graceful, and she moved away through the crowd with the composure of someone who has lost a hand and intends to manage that fact without fuss. Margaret watched her go with something that was not victory and not pity but something in between, the specific feeling of having met a capable opponent and emerged intact, which was not quite the same as winning and carried its own complicated weight. Edmund leaned slightly toward her. "Are you all right?" he said quietly, not rescuing, asking. "Yes," she said, "are you?" A pause. "Yes," he said, and then more quietly, "I am sorry it took me this long." She looked at him. "To come to the ball." "To stand here," he said, "beside you like this." She held his gaze. Around them the ball continued, the music, the voices, the particular warmth of a room full of people on a December evening. And Vivienne stood on her other side holding her hand, and the Harwick ballroom with all its history and its whispers and its carefully arranged conclusions had not managed to make her into something she was not. She was Margaret Ashford Cavendish, Duchess of Cavendish, thorough reader of archives, finder of survey documents, Wearer of servants' uniforms when required, counter of seconds in silences, keeper of 2 folded notes in a nightstand drawer. She was entirely herself. "You are here now," she said to Edmund. She did not let go of Vivienne's hand. She did not move away from Edmund's warmth beside her. The orchestra played. They left at 11. In the carriage going home, Vivienne sat across from them and closed her eyes within the first 5 minutes, which Margaret suspected was not actually sleep, but the old woman's version of granting them privacy, and she was grateful for it. The carriage was warm. Outside, the December dark moved past the windows, the county reduced to shapes and the occasional light of a distant house. Edmund was looking at the window. She was looking at her hands. After a while he said, without turning, "When I was standing there beside you, when Sylvia—" He stopped. "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "I kept thinking," he said, "about the entrance hall, our wedding morning, about what I had arranged." He paused. "About what you had refused to give me." "I refused to make it easy," she said. "I told you." "Yes," he turned from the window. "I am glad you didn't." She looked at him. "If you had reacted as I expected," he said, "we would be having a very different marriage. A very," he paused, manageable marriage." "Manageable," she repeated. "Cold," he said. "I was going to say cold." The carriage moved through the dark. "Edmund," she said. "Yes." "When we get home," she paused, "I would like to play the pianoforte." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, that warmth again, fully present now, not working through layers but simply there, as if it had finally found the surface after a long time underground. "It will be past midnight," he said. "I know," she said. Across from them, Vivienne did not open her eyes, but the corner of her mouth moved, very slightly, in the dark of the carriage. "Then I will listen," Edmund said. She played for an hour. The music room at midnight, lit by 3 candelabras, the best instrument in the county beneath her hands, and Edmund in the chair by the fire, not reading, not writing, not managing anything, simply listening, with the full and complete attention of a man who had recently discovered that attention was the only currency that mattered. She played her mother's pieces first, then things she had learned herself, over years of indifferent instruments in her father's indifferent houses, then things she had not played in a long time, pieces that required more than technical facility, pieces that required that you be present in them. She was present. When she stopped, the silence was the comfortable kind. "You were not exaggerating," Edmund said from the chair. "Better than quite well." "I told you," she said. "You did." He was quiet for a moment. "You have told me a great deal of true things." Another pause. "I have not always been ready to hear them." She turned on the bench to face him. He was looking at the fire, the light of it moving across his face, and he looked in that moment less like the Duke of Cavendish than like the man underneath the title. The 19-year-old who had burned a letter, the 4-year-old who had been told his mother died, the 23-year-old who had not known that comfortable was worth something until it was too late to keep it. She looked at him for a long time. "Edmund," she said, "I think you should write to your mother." He looked at her. "Not for her sake," she said carefully, "or not only for yours." She held his gaze. "You said you wanted to know why. You have wanted to know for 20 years. That is a long time to carry something without understanding it." "She left," he said. His voice was level. "Whatever her reasons." "She left a marriage that was making her into something she didn't recognize," Margaret said quietly. "That is what Vivienne told me. She did not leave you. She left what she was becoming." The fire. The silence. Edmund looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the formal face, not the real face she had worked to uncover, but something underneath both of those, something that had been there a very long time without any air. "How do you know that?" he said very quietly, makes it better. I don't, she said. I don't know if it makes it better. I know it makes it true. And I think, she said carefully, that you have been living with a version of it that is not quite true, and that the not quite true version has been shaping things for 20 years. He was silent for a very long time. The candles burned. The fire settled. The house made its sounds around them, the Cavendish Manor vocabulary of timber and stone that they had both, separately, spent their nights counting. Will you, he started, stopped. If I write to her, will you? Yes, she said, before he finished, because she knew what he was asking and the answer was yes, straightforwardly and without condition. He looked at her. You don't know what I was going to ask. You were going to ask if I would be there, she said. The answer is yes. He held her gaze for a long moment. I don't deserve that, he said. Probably not yet, she agreed. You are working toward it. Something in him shifted, the last of something, the final loosening of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. She watched it happen. She had been watching it happen gradually for months, but this was the last of it, the part she had not been sure he would reach. He reached it. He stood from the chair. He crossed the music room and he stood beside the piano and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the candles threw their light across both of them in the old house in the December night. He offered her his hand. Not formally, not as a gesture, simply his hand open between them offered. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about the entrance hall, about 40 people, about a servant's uniform and a decision made at the top of a staircase and everything that had happened after. She thought about what she had said in that same entrance hall, months ago, standing with her back to him, the distance we traveled. She put her hand in his. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. It had all been said, in ledgers and libraries and frost-covered gardens and midnight carriage rides and an hour of music in an empty room. Outside, Cavendish Manor held them in its particular quiet. Things continued. 6 months later, the letter from Edinburgh arrived on a Wednesday morning in June. Margaret was in the library when Edmund brought it to her. He did not open it first. He brought it to her unopened, which told her everything about what the last 6 months had made of them. He sat across from her at the long table and set it between them, and they looked at it together for a moment. This cream envelope with the Edinburgh postmark and the handwriting of a woman neither of them had met. Do you want me to leave? Margaret asked. No, he said, without hesitation. He opened it. She watched him read. She did not try to see the words. This was his, and she had learned the difference between being present and being intrusive, which was one of the more useful things this marriage had taught her. She watched his face instead, the way she had always watched his face, counting the seconds and reading the silences and learning the language of a man who had spent 20 years building walls that were, slowly and at considerable mutual cost, coming down. He read it twice, then he set it on the table. She wants to meet, he said. Yes, Margaret said. She had known, from the moment Vivienne helped him compose his own letter 3 months ago, that this was the likely answer. Edmund's mother was not, by all accounts, a woman who did things in half measures. She explains, he said. He stopped. She explains why. Margaret waited. It is, he looked at the letter. It is not simple, and it is not what I imagined, and it does not, he stopped again. It does not resolve into something clean. No, Margaret said, I didn't think it would. But it is true, he said. I can tell that it is true. That is enough for now, she said. You don't have to decide anything else today. He looked at her across the table. Outside, the June morning was moving through the library windows, the first real warmth of summer, the grounds green and full after the long winter, the formal garden in bloom in a way that made it unrecognizable from the frost-covered geometry she had first walked through. 6 months. She thought sometimes about how much could happen in 6 months. About what a house could become when two people inside it decided, gradually and imperfectly, to stop managing each other and start knowing each other instead. "I am going to write back," Edmund said. "I am going to say yes." "Good," she said. "Will you come with me to Edinburgh when it happens?" "Yes," she said. "I already told you I would." "You told me 6 months ago," he said. "Things were different 6 months ago." "Some things," she said, "not that one." He looked at her with the real face. It was the only face he wore now mostly, in rooms where it was just the two of them, which were many rooms now and increasing. He had not stopped being private, had not stopped being measured and careful and occasionally infuriating in his slowness toward the obvious. But the walls had come down enough that she could see him clearly, and what she saw, she had come to understand, was worth the considerable work of getting there. "Margaret," he said. "Yes." He did not say anything for a moment. She waited, because she had learned to wait for him, had learned that his silences were not absence but preparation, the specific gathering of a man who did not speak carelessly and meant every word he finally chose. "I love you," he said, quietly, simply, with the directness of someone who has practiced something difficult until he can do it without flinching. "I want you to know that. I am aware I should have found a way to say it before now. I am aware that the not saying has been." "Edmund," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said. "You know," he repeated. "I have known for some time," she said. "I was waiting for you to catch up." Something moved in his expression, that warmth, completely unguarded now with nothing between it and the surface. "How long?" he said. She considered this. "The boundary dispute," she said, "when you stood in the library and listened, when you said, 'I am asking now.'" She paused. Not love exactly at that point, but the beginning of it, the place where it was going. "That was 3 months into our marriage," he said. "You were a slow study," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the particular quality of a man who has discovered that certain things can be said directly after all. "And now?" "And now," she said, "I love you, which I suspect you also knew." "I hoped," he said. "I was not certain." "You could have asked," she said. "I was afraid of the answer." "Edmund," she said, "you are going to have to stop being afraid of answers. You are married to a woman who finds things in archives. There are no answers in this house that will stay hidden for long." He looked at her. That warmth, and underneath it something steadier and deeper than warmth, the specific feeling of someone who has arrived, after a long and complicated journey, somewhere real. "I know," he said. "I am counting on it." Vivienne died in August. Peacefully in the warm room in the West Wing, in the chair by the window where she had drunk her tea and waited for the right woman to arrive. Margaret was with her. She had been with her most of that last week, the two of them in the warm room talking sometimes and sometimes not, the particular language of a friendship that had no template and needed none. On the last evening, Vivienne held her hand, the same way she had held it in the Harwick ballroom, small and firm, and looked at the window where the August light was doing what August light does in the late afternoon, golden and unhurried and full of itself. "You wore the uniform," Vivienne said. She had said it before, months ago, on that first evening. She said it again now with the quality of someone returning to a thing that had pleased them. "Yes," Margaret said. "And came down the stairs." "Yes." "Good," said Vivienne. She closed her eyes. She did not open them again. Edmund stood at the window of the library for a long time after. Margaret found him there that evening, the June archive spread on the table behind him untouched, looking at the grounds in the late summer dark. She did not say anything. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window and looked at what he was looking at, the formal garden, the long lawn, the tree line black against the last of the light. After a while he said, She knew, from the beginning, she saw what it could be. Yes, Margaret said. Before we did. Yes. He was quiet. I owe her, he stopped. There is no accounting for what I owe her. No, Margaret said. There isn't, but she didn't do it to be owed. She paused. She did it because she had been waiting for 60 years for someone to fix what she had allowed to go wrong, and she was 83 years old and she was running out of time to wait. She looked at the garden. We are what she fixed it with. Edmund turned from the window. He looked at her fully, completely, with the attention he had learned to give her, which was the best attention she had ever been given by anyone. Are you happy? He said. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. She thought about a servant's uniform and a staircase and a decision, and an archive and a solicitor and a boundary dispute, and a letter under a door and Edinburgh, and a warm room in the West Wing, and everything that had accumulated between that first morning and this one. Yes, she said, I am happy. Even with, he gestured slightly. At the window, at the grounds, at the specific complicated weight of everything that had happened, and everything that was still unfolding. Because of, she said, not in spite of. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he took her hand. They stood at the library window until the dark was complete and the grounds had disappeared into it, and the house had begun its nightly vocabulary of sounds. Timber, stone, wind, the particular settling of 2 centuries of Cavendishes, and now one Ashford who had walked in on a winter morning, and decided, at the top of a staircase, to stay. The drawer of the nightstand upstairs held 2 folded pieces of paper. One with a servant's uniform. One with 3 words. She had never thrown them away. She never would. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.